What is the worst case of psycho-overprotective parenting that you've ever seen? I was taking a general chemistry lab in college and a parent emailed me after the first lab report with an annotated copy of the graded assignment which I gave a B+. Little Johnny had never gotten a B in a class before, and I was just being unfair, since it was his first semester in college. Long story short, she threatened to go to the prof. I said go ahead, and they did. The professor was awesome. When kids bitch about their grades, he offers them a A grade, and then goes over the report with a fine-toothed comb. The B+ got changed to a C. Edit. The student was the one who ultimately asked for the A grade. Would he have asked for one if his parents didn't make a stink? Maybe. Maybe not. It doesn't matter. Part of being in college is learning how to take responsibility for your actions. And there's a reason professors rely on TAs for grading freshman lab assignments. Their time and attention is better spent elsewhere. Asking the professor for a personal regrade must carry downside risk. Otherwise everyone would ask for one every time. Please feel free to question the grader on anything. That's part of their job too. Just make sure you have a solid case before requesting a formal regrade. I once dated a girl with absolutely insane parents. Throughout middle and high school, they refused to let her go out to anything but school and choir trips. She had to argue and bargain with them for months just to be able to go to senior prom. They wouldn't let her go to junior prom. They also refused to let her get a driver's license or a car to limit her mobility. Even to this day they refuse to let her go out. She, a 20-year-old woman, has to get permission from her super restrictive mom and dad to go out for coffee at the cafe downstairs. The worst part of all of this is that she can't move out, as they have hold of her passport, and where she lives, it's more or less impossible to get anything done without it. Edit. To all of you talking about the legality of withholding her passport, I don't know for sure whether it is or not. The laws where I live sometimes had really backwards policies. I have advised her to try to take action/escape many times, but for personal reasons she has decided not to. I disagree entirely with her choice, but it's her choice to make, not mine. Edit 2. While I love your guys' concern and willingness to help, I will not be giving out information that can be used to identify her for reasons listed in the above edit, so please don't ask. My dad would lock me in the house like it's a prison. He never let me play outside with the other kids. The only time I go outside is when I went to school, and even then he wouldn't let me participate in extracurricular activities. He would always hang around the school. I was such a depressed, lonely child. I had a 9:30 p.m. curfew until I was 19. The only friend I had was my dog. I loved that dog so much, but my dad killed him in a drunken and coke-fueled rage. He curb stomped the dog to death, then hid the body somewhere in the woods where no one would find it. He killed the dog because he said the dog was being violent and aggressive, because it's in the nature of all pit bulls. That's bullshit. My dog was the sweetest, most loving dog ever. He loves everyone and everything. I think he did it because he knew that dog made me happy. On a positive note, my father is currently in prison for 35 years for statutory rap, possession of cocaine, domestic assault, and child abuse. My mom was too afraid to say or do anything. She got so traumatized and depressed she stopped caring about anything, including her son. She is still emotionally scarred just like me, but we are slowly but surely recovering. Yes, I've been waiting for this, so I met my wife on OkCupid. We were about 21 at the time. I came into her life at a bad moment. She was failing classes, anxiety prone, etc. Eventually she got asked to take a leave of absence from her school. Against my better advice, she didn't tell her parents, went back to the school to pack up her stuff and figure out what her next move was. Well, her parents found out within that next day or so, and her dad flew some odd 1,000 miles to get her and go back home. But this was the next thing, they cut her off from the world. She couldn't go out of the house unless it was to the schools that they enrolled her in to get her back in good standing. She dropped off the face of the earth. Her mom spent time writing all of her friends, pretending to be her, stating that they could not be friends, and that she was moving on with her life. Her mom did the same to me. Eventually I got a hold of her, and we had to talk secret for months on end. We started dating, and she graduated, and we kept talking. Well, she finally moves out of her parents' house and comes to visit me some 1,000 miles away. Her parents cut her cell phone off. When she gets back to her hometown, they demand she comes over. They confiscate some items of hers that I gave her and told her to never speak to me again. That doesn't work, of course. Eventually we say fuck it, because they are batshit crazy. We are talking the mother mailing me that she knew who many managers were and could call them and let them some faking craziness and get married. When we finally tell them, which is like a month or two after it happens, the mom played the victim, like we didn't even give her the chance to get to know me and to like me. And I'm just like, bitch, you impersonated your daughter and told me that you wanted nothing to do with me. Your daughter told you that we would be together and you threatened to disown her. As you could see, this completely works me up. Nonetheless, now the mother refuses to speak either of us, has manipulated the bull Les's father into not speaking to his own child, and the teenaged younger sister thinks that my wife is the world's most awful person for choosing to live her life. For fact's sake. My boss has a baby and a 4-year-old, and they are super overprotective. Like, the 4-year-old still sleeps in their bed with them and the baby, and they haven't left either kid alone with another person ever. Sometimes he talks about how they've never been out since the kids. Like, I can relate. I have a pair myself, but we still live our lives. The 4-year-old went to preschool, so the mom went with him and sat in the class every day and even sat at his table and played with him instead of letting him interact with peers. One time they were in the office and my boss hand fed him food because he didn't want the kid handling the food himself. Since the kid had recently touched the computer he was describing their garden and how the food at the back never gets picked because we can't go back there ever because of the baby. You know. No, I have no idea. You live on a small fenced lot in the suburbs. What are you afraid of getting to your baby if you walk out to the corner of your yard? The worst part is, he's constantly telling me how tired he is and how his kids never sleep, but it's probably because they are all sleeping in the same bed, waking each other up all the time. Both of my kids were in their own room by a couple of months old, and it made life so much easier. When they're in the room with you, you notice every little noise. Well, there's this new popular post making the rounds on Facebook about how when on the street you must carry your child in your arms at all times. Never let him walk, not even if you're holding his hand or on a leash, as it makes them too easy targets for snatching. And obviously never take them out to play. You'd have to let them do stuff and it's too dangerous. It also has a couple extra interesting advice. You should make posts of any person that seems to be lingering about. They're probably kidnappers looking at your kids. I've also seen several posts of random people on stores because someone thought they looked suspicious. Marizo, if they are males buying stuff that only women are supposed to buy, like fabrics or cleaning supplies, if you ever lose sight of your child, immediately consider it a kidnapping. Edit. Looking for the post. In the meantime, this is a new warning. It's in Spanish, but it tells you to never go to the supermarket alone with your kids, ages 1 through 20. Always bring along the father, as you can't be constantly holding him, since you might need to let go of him to push the cart or grab stuff. Edit to http://imga.com/yq/force-niu. Print this page to add your child's personal info, fingerprints and some hair clips for DNA identification. Carry it with you always, to have everything ready when, if, your child is kidnapped. My parents are super strict with me. I'm the youngest of 3. There is an age gap of 12 and 10 between my older siblings and I. My parents were not really strict with my older siblings as they are with me. I can understand why, because my sister Ann often got married and pregnant. She is now in an abusive relationship that is very much poisonous. My brother is clinically depressed and spends his days at work or in his room. I understand the reasons why my parents want to keep a close leash on me, but sometimes I feel very suffocated. I was not allowed to go to the mall with my friends alone until I was 17 years old. I would always have to beg my parents to let me go to the school dances and school events. My brother and my sister even agree with my parents about not letting me go anywhere. I feel like this way of living has taken a toll on my life. I live in America and I would always see my friends hanging out with each other at the mall or at a restaurant. They would post it on Facebook and would always wish that it was me who was able to hang out with friends. I would just lay in bed all day and not do anything productive. Eventually when I did start going out with friends, my mom would only let me leave for 3 hours at a time. She would start calling me and blowing not only my phone, but also my friend's phone. I was really embarrassed, so I just never went out. I developed anxiety from this, which I still suffer from. Bottom line, let your kids have some fun and just trust them that they are going to do the right thing. Oh, I got one right for this one. I've mentioned it before in some other threads, but I just can't get over how batshit insane this woman is. A good friend of mine has lived with his grandparents his whole life. It's just his grandma now, and she's insanity turned to 11. I've known this guy since high school. It took 4 years before I was allowed to go into his house because his grandma didn't like the fact I had long hair. She didn't want a hippie in the house. When he did leave the house, she would call around 8 to 9 p.m. and ask when he's going to be home. Well, I use ask loosely. It was more like pestering him that he needs to get home. She continues to call every 30 minutes or so. There's been no repercussions from him completely ignoring this. The point when she goes out of the house, he has to go with her. I understand she may have a fear of going out alone, and that's probably bolstered a bit by her watching of Fox News, but they live in a very low crime area. There's been one shooting in the last decade, no muggings/armed robberies of people, and the only thing the cops really have to respond to are people stealing from Walmart. Point his car got totaled 2 years ago. He still doesn't have another one because she won't let him save the money to get another one. He always has to pay vast majority of bills and rent, despite her being fully able to pay her share as well. He can't just refuse because she'll eventually kick him out, and that threat holds more weight now since he doesn't have a car. He's using hers to go back and forth to work. Several years back we went on vacation and she told us not to go to a place that was on our agenda because it was a bad area. We told her we wouldn't. Of course, we did anyway, and surprise, not a single problem at all. Can't have any alcohol. He sneaks it in anyway, has to leave the door to his room open, and no bad language. In all honesty, she treats him like a 12-year-old. He's in his upper 20s. I already said something about the family in a previous thread, but I still have a good answer and sweet karma, am I right? Anyway, there was this family of 2 parents and 4 kids that had the most overprotective health nut mom ever, and she also was a very strict conservative Christian. Their dad wasn't the same way, but he pretty much allowed her to be strict like she was. She wouldn't let her kids do things that most normal kids were allowed to do, like eat any food that wasn't organic and wholesome. She believed that GMO and HCF caused bad problems later in life. She also hated microwaves and wouldn't let her kids use them, watch anything with any hint of the supernatural that didn't have to do with God. So that meant no Disney princesses, no Star Wars, no Harry Potter, no Lord of the Rings, no celebrating Christmas or Halloween. Those are pagan holidays. No violence or swearing or such in anything. My friend from that family had a Gamma Cube with a few games on it. He used to have Super Smash Bros. Melee, but his mom took Smash Bros. Because it was too violent for him. I feel sorry for her kids. I know the oldest boy is going to be far from the perfect kid his mom wants him to be, and the girls will probably follow suit. I know when I have kids, I will not be the same way. I used to work in the post office of a university. We would encounter helicopter parents from time to time. I remember getting a phone call from some student's mother. She wanted to understand our procedures in detail. What happens when a student gets a package that's too big to fit in his mailbox, etc. After much discussion I asked her, "Why do you need to know this?" Turns out she wanted to know so she could explain it to her son. I also took a phone call from another mother who listed a lot of rambling complaints about the university, most of which shouldn't have concerned me in the first place because they had nothing to do with my department. But one of her allegations was that her daughter had been sexually harassed while working in the cafeteria. I figured this was serious, so I wrote down the details and reported it to my boss, who made some inquiries. It turns out the university had already heard this story from the mother, but had not taken any action, because the student herself had refused to file a complaint. Only the mother had complained. So now, the mother, after having already complained, and not getting satisfaction, for good reason, had decided to repeat her complaint to the post office. My sister was by far the worst I've ever met. She was a typical shitty teenager in high school, doing the whole "I'm 17, I'm grown, you can't tell me what to do" thing, including drinking, drugs, and such, none of which I have any problem with, but probably aren't a good idea if you don't possess the responsibility to deal with them. She got knocked up at 17 by a dude who bailed on her, and she took about 1.5 tons of reality to the face and decided to turn her life around. Problem is, she swung too far back in the other direction and became a super fundamentalist Christian and chalked her getting knocked up by a transient Mexican farm worker and literally everything else to God's plan. After my nephew was born, things didn't start to get bad until he was around 7 or 8 and developed his own personality. She started forcing him to go to church and catechism against his wishes. She also severely restricted the information and media he was allowed access to. Books were restricted solely to the Bible and other religious texts and educational books, so long as they didn't contradict scripture in any way. She refused to allow him to have friends unless she'd vetted them and ensured they came from a good Christian family. Until he was 16, the only television he was allowed to watch was Disney Channel and CNN. She put parental block on everything else. He wasn't allowed to see movies rated above PG or get his driver's license until he was 18, and she couldn't really stop him anymore. Video games were right out of the question. The end result of his sheltered upbringing was that, as soon as he was a legal adult, he began to rebel against everything she'd ever imposed on him in whatever way he could find. He started drinking and doing drugs, stopped going to church or any of the religious studies groups she made him go to, and fell in with a group of guys who got him in a fair amount of trouble. Thankfully he's calmed down recently, in his early 20s. He's in college now, still drinks and smokes weed, but not nearly as much as he used to, and, to my knowledge, hasn't committed a crime in a few years. My coworker has made her poor 13-year-old terrified of the world. Coworker proudly brags about how she has always told her daughter to never allow herself to be alone at any time, because the world is full of murder rapists lurking around every corner, just waiting to kidnap her. As a result, the daughter is an absolute nervous wreck at all times. The daughter calls my coworker every morning before she leaves for the school bus in tears, because she has to walk half a block to the bus stop by herself. Then she'll call every afternoon crying hysterically because she has to walk home from the bus by herself and let herself into the house. She's terrified of everything. Every noise is someone trying to break in. She'll call her mom freaking out about seeing a car drive down the road that she didn't recognize. I feel bad for the poor girl. Imagine being thoroughly convinced that you'll be kidnapped and wrapped and murdered any second, every day. So sad. Edit. I don't care what all you people think of me for not calling CPS. Clearly none of you ever dealt with them. The bottom line is that a call to CPS will do nothing to help this kid. She's not being hit, she's not being molested, and she's not being neglected. They will not do anything. The only thing a call to CPS would do in this case is turn her mother's paranoia up to 11. If I thought it would actually help, I would call. I'm not a faking monster. I don't need to feel guilty or blame myself over choosing to not make this girl's life even more of a nightmare than it already is. If she was being hit, neglected, or molested, maybe it would help to call, and I would. CPS is not the all-powerful fix everything after one tip institution you all seem to think it is. The abuse/neglect needs to be obvious, provable, and extreme in order for them to intervene in any meaningful way. And the older the child is, the less likely they are to get help at all. CPS is designed to keep families together. Ask any social worker how they feel about CPS, and I guarantee you, they will have dozens of stories about how unhelpful CPS actually is. I refuse to give her mother the push she needs to lock that poor child in the house until she's 18 like some kind of actually afraid of the world mother Gothel. My best childhood friend mom was an overprotective bitch. After his dad left him, she practically went insane. She went and enrolled him in counseling before putting him on a shit ton of psych meds, some of which being her own meds not prescribed by a doctor. One night he locked himself in his room to Skype his dad. He left his mom because she was overprotective, and his mom came upstairs and like busted down his door with a chair or some sheet and took his laptop away and told him he was never supposed to talk to his dad ever again. So he threatened to run away or kill himself. So she sent him to a mental rehabilitation camp for about a year. After he got home he was extremely depressed and told me, when we were alone, that he never wanted to stay with his mom ever again. Then about a month later he packed his stuff and had printed out legit adoption papers and was planning to run away to my house and let my parents adopt him. His mom caught him and drugged him with a heavy sedative for their dog who had just gotten surgery. She called an ambulance and had him moved to a mental asylum where he still is today and will be till 2017. I get to see him about once a year on his birthday when my mom drives me up to see him. It is really sad because he is a normal kid just with a super overprotective mother, and she has ruined his life. When he gets out I will be going into my freshman year of college, and I'm planning to pick him up and never take him back to his mom. Take him in as a little brother. At college orientation, they had all of us incoming freshmen and our parents in a huge auditorium. After the presentation on stuff we needed to know/do prior to the start of the school year, they opened it up for CAPoint. So they call on this woman who raised her hand. And this woman, who was dead center in this huge auditorium, stands up and proceeds to ramble on and on and on in a quivering voice, soon reduced to all-out tears, about all of her fears of all the horrible things that might happen to her son while he's at college. What if he's in the hospital and she's never notified, and her son is dying without her by his side? What if he falls out of his bunk bed and is unconscious in his dorm room and the university doesn't notice he's missing? What if, etc. It's this super nerdy, nervous, mother hen type woman. Her husband and her poor son are shrinking down in their chairs. The poor son doesn't take his eyes off of his feet the whole time. I felt so very bad for that poor boy. Starting college is nerve-wracking enough, and here this poor kid gets to start off his college experience by possibly being known as that kid with the overprotective hysterical mother at orientation. I don't know if this qualifies, but here you go. I was walking slowly down the street when I saw a whale-sized woman, sorry, it's adequate in this case, around in her 40s, accompanied by super thin teen girl. The woman was nearly shouting to her smartphone. She didn't look poor, and girl was quietly walking with head down. Then she saw ice cream stand. Her face lit up. She asked her mother if she can eat one, and after getting a nod and remark that she is allowed only one scoop, she happily ran to the stand, pulling some change from her pocket, not purse or anything like that. When she ran, I actually saw that she wasn't thin, she was Auschwitz thin. I bet her ribs were clanking each step. As soon as she got her ice cream, she started licking it like it was antidote for a poison. She managed to lick a third of the scoop when the mother came up to her, said enough. I won't allow you to repeat my mistakes, and just wrenched the cone from kid's hands and pushed into her mouth in one move. Gulp later, you can't get fat, it's unhealthy. I stopped listening her because what hit me, that the girl was still smiling from ear to ear, in fact, like a Cheshire cat. She scored in the game, and she was content. Since then every time I stretch my hand to get something sweet, I see that monster mum. Hell, I lost great deal of fat because of her. And I still wonder if this girl, I'm sorry, is still alive. My boyfriend and I were on a cruise, which stopped at multiple islands. We were insane kids hanging out on the beach, where they had a little open bar, to get food and drinks. When we first got on the beach, we went early, so we can get chairs. After 20 minutes, an older couple with a few little kids, all girls, insisted we had taken their chairs, that they had previously reserved, but they had no tags on the chairs, so they walked a ways down the beach. Anyways, we're at this little tiki bar thing getting food and drinks when one of the little girls of the older couple wearing a huge bucket hat is wandering around the front of a gift shop, where there were wooden stairs. All of a sudden, the little girl isn't paying attention and walks up the stairs and bumps her head on a tree and falls down 2 steps. We saw the whole time and she barely bumped her head, but as a child I probably would have cried to point the mother and over to the little girl screaming, oh my god, are you alright? What happened to you? What happened? Oh my god. Totally. Made the situation worse and the little girl started screaming even more. When the dad turns to us and asks if we saw anything, we just said she bumped her head and fell, no big deal. The dad literally rolled his eyes and told his wife to calm the fuck down. Have an acquaintance with 2 kids. Oldest daughter is a princess. Is now 21, size 16 but thinks she's a size 4. Mother has a mental note of everyone who has missed one of her princess parties. Goes back at least 5 years. And she throws some huge damn parties for this ungrateful large waste of air. For every birthday, for her 18th she hired a pack of paparazzi to follow her around all day taking pictures of her shopping and her multiple clothing changes. Graduation from high school, barely made it. First day of community college, lasted exactly 1 week, and whatever occasion she can throw a party for her, she does. Younger son, just graduated from high school, decided to go out of state to college, with his on again, off again girlfriend. They are 18. He is actually taking online courses, but mama got him a 2-bedroom apartment, furnished it completely down to the silverware, and lives there 2 weeks out of the month, with her son and his girlfriend. These 2 people are totally incapable of doing anything on their own. Daughter thinks world revolves around her and can't understand why people don't fawn over her constantly. Son freaked out when the power went out during a storm. Needs directions texted to him because he couldn't figure out where the grocery store was. It's exhausting being around her with her phone going constantly. Just remembered she had to send a YouTube video to her son to show him how to replace the toilet paper roll. He couldn't understand her directions. Sheesh. My father used to be a gymnastics coach and judge. One of the few people in my state that was a level 3 in both men's and women's gymnastics. What that means is that he could coach and judge regional, state and national camps, but not international ones. At one of the regional camps my father was judging at, he was approached by one of the parents of the gymnasts asking for her child to get at least a 9.3 to stay in her club's elite team. Her child was averaging a 9.0 across the camp. My father reported it to the head judge, and it wasn't the first time she has been warned to not approach the judges during the camp. When the session ended, the head judge called in all the judges and told them that if the woman approached them again, to send her directly to the head judge. An hour into the next session she approached another judge on the same table as my father and the head judge. She was ejected from the camp and her child was disqualified. When parents agree to enter kids into camps, they have a page of rules they have to agree to. One of them is not to approach judges until after the awards are presented. If they do, their child may be disqualified. TLDR. Parent approached judge at camp asking for score to be changed for her kid several times. She gets ejected and her kid gets disqualified. Oh boy, here we go. Let's talk about my sophomore year homecoming dance last year. It's a really long story, so hang on tight. Okay, so I was friends with this freshman boy named Ethan. He's a super nice guy, very funny, and very quirky. It's a month before homecoming, and he asks me, hey, do you want to go to HC with me just as friends? And of course I said sure, because why not? Now it gets crazy. We exchanged our mother's phone numbers so that they could plan everything out, dinner being brought to and from the dance, etc. So my mom calls her later that night and the woman has planned out everything about that night in about 4 hours. Turns out she's also pregnant and due the night of the dance. Fantastic night of homecoming swings around and his dad brings him to take pictures and bring us to dinner and then the dance. His dad is super laid back and jokes around with me and Ethan and says he's very lucky that I agreed to go with him. I thought nothing of the comment. We go to dinner and our meals were already pre-ordered and prepaid so that we could just get going. When we were done, Ethan walked up to the counter and the manager, who apparently was friends with Ethan's mom, came back to our little table and said, your mother called for this, right? Yes sir, she told me to keep an eye on you to make sure you eat everything on your plate. Ethan was embarrassed, and I didn't admit that I was getting a sneaking suspicion that something was off. We're in the middle of eating dinner and his mom keeps texting him. If he doesn't answer in 2 minutes she calls him and screams at him, and I mean I could hear it across the table 4 feet between us. She's yelling at him for not taking pictures of everything. Our food, my corsage, our pictures from earlier, etc. It was the most awkward dinner because I couldn't even start a conversation with him without his mom calling and screaming again. So we left the restaurant after either of us barely ate our food, and we are 3 blocks from the restaurant. At this point I feel awful for Ethan. He then mirror a text from his mom, "Where's my picture with the mural?" There was a huge mural on the side of the restaurant that we were supposed to take a pic with. Oops. So we go back to the restaurant and take the picture, and he sends it to her right before she calls and screams how he's messing everything up. Jesus Christ, woman, leave him alone, he's a nervous wreck. So we get to the dance and we meet up with my best friend Marcy and her date Carl. We go out on the dance floor and Marcy and I try teaching Ethan and Carl how to dance. It doesn't go well, but it's fun to see them try. We decided we wanted to go and sit down, so we head to the rec room, where we sit with a bunch of marching band friends. Ethan checks his phone, 20 missed calls from his mom and 15 minutes along with voicemails and texts. Great. He leaves to handle his mother, while I stay with Marcy, Carl, John, who I had a crush on, and a couple others. I had a blast with them in the rec room until Carl comes back. I check the time and it's been a half hour. We all go out to the dance floor and have fun again. At some point, the rose on my corsage fell off and Marcy picked it up and asked Ethan, "What should we do with this?" And he said, "I don't really care at this point, my mother's going to kill me already." So she chucks it perfectly into the middle of the grinding circle 20 feet away. As soon as the rose goes out of sight, Ethan drops to his knees, yelling, "No, I needed a picture of that." Well, sheet point, we switch between the rec room and the dance floor for the rest of the night. Ethan's constantly on his phone getting yelled at by his mom or taking pictures of the dance, so I spent most of the night with marching band friends. That part was more fun than any other part of the night. Point, we go back to my house a couple hours after this constantly happening, and he asks if he could come upstairs for a couple more pictures for his mom. Sigh, okay, sure, I can do a couple more. So he comes inside, and my mom takes more pics of us. He starts freaking out about the corsage picture again, and my mom takes a very pixelated and zoomed in picture of my wrist from one of our many photos. He says it's good enough and he leaves. On Monday it turns out his mom grounded him for not taking pictures of everything and not answering his phone when she called. So he didn't have a phone for a month. Point, and that's the story of how my sophomore year homecoming was almost ruined. Back in high school, my friend and I would regularly hang out at his place to play video games and what have you. He had a younger brother who was in middle school at the time and also had a friend come over regularly. This friend of his was the product of a super religious, super strict, single mom. When he would come over we had to hide away anything he thought his mom wouldn't want him to see or hear. It was a huge list of things, but one of the strangest things was anime. My friend's brother was an anime fan and had mangas and posters, so when he would come over he had to take them down. A pretty funny moment with him was when my friend and I were playing the first Ninja Gaiden for the Xbox. He came in with his hands over his eyes and asked us to pause the game so he could get something. We obliged and waited for him to find what he was looking for and leave, but just before he left the room, I unpaused a little too early and he witnessed Ryu cut a guy in half and a fountain of blood shoot out of him. He screamed and ran out of the room. I actually still kinda keep in contact with him. He is a lot better these days. I remember talking to him about how he was like when he was still in middle school. He told me that he was so scared of his mom. He literally thought his mom could read his thoughts. That's why he was too scared to do anything behind her back. My parents were weird. They were very strict in a lot of ways. For example, I was never allowed to listen to music that wasn't Christian until I was about a freshman in high school. I was never allowed to have a girlfriend even as a senior in high school. I still dated people, of course, but I had to sneak around and lie constantly. When I would get caught all hell would break loose. My parents had all my passwords to everything, social media, email, you name it. I was never allowed to have a girl over the house, even in group settings. Because according to my mom, guys and girls can't be just friends. She claimed it to be literally impossible. My parents would also spy on me constantly and listen on and just about all of my phone calls, to the point where if I called someone I had to make sure all the phones in the house were in my room. I was never allowed to have a phone, but they always had to know what I was doing. So they had all my friends' phone numbers and would call them constantly when I was with them. They wouldn't let me hang out with people unless I told them exactly what our plans were. So telling them that I was going to a friend's house to hang out just to hang out, which was the truth 100% of the time, I had to come up with some random itinerary. That all being said though, they still let me do things. For being very strict parents, they were also not very strict in some ways. Most of the times I had to bend over backwards to be able to do stuff, but every once in a while they just didn't seem to care. Amazingly enough, I have a very good relationship with them, which is mostly due to the fact I live across the country from them.